Welcome to the Invest for More Real Estate Podcast. My name is Mark Ferguson, and I am your host. I'm a house flipper. I flip 10 to 15 houses a year. I own 13 rental properties with a goal to buy 100 by 2023. I'm also a real estate agent. I've been licensed since '01. I run a team of 9. We sell close to 200 houses a year. So on this show, we like to interview house flippers, landlords, and the best real estate agents in the business. So stay tuned for some great shows. If you want more information on my rentals, on the numbers, how I buy properties, check out investformore.com.
Hey everyone, it's Mark Ferguson with Invest for More. Welcome to another episode of the Invest for More Real Estate Podcast. I've got a really exciting guest on for today's show. He's been in the real estate industry since the 70s, has done a number of different things, which is really impressive. Been in the mortgage industry, the timber industry, development, foreclosures, buying properties, hard money lender. Just amazing how many things he's accomplished. Jay Hinrichs, thank you so much for being on the show. How are you doing?
Very good, Mark. I'm glad to be here and look forward to a nice conversation this morning.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it. I love talking to people who've been involved in so many different aspects of real estate. You know, I myself get involved in quite a few things, but I think you've trumped me by quite a bit with everything you've done. I'm curious now, your father was in real estate when you first began, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. My dad was cut his teeth in the land business, what would be called the recreational land business, and then did very well at it as a salesman, and then within a couple of years had his own company and ran that up until his retirement.
Very cool. Now, my dad was an agent starting in '78, so I grew up in real estate myself. And the whole time I grew up, I told myself I'd never get into real estate because I'd been surrounded by it so much. And then I graduated from college with a finance degree, couldn't really find the perfect job. I'm like, I'll just do real estate part-time. And that turned into something pretty awesome, obviously. But did you always want to be in real estate when you're growing up, or was that something you just kind of fell into?
No, I was the same way. You usually don't want to do what your parents are doing or whatever. And so I tried a couple different types of jobs, and my dad had encouraged me to, hey, get your real estate license, give it a try. And, obviously if you don't like it, you can go find another job. And I got my license when I was 18, and I had gone to college for a little while and just didn't. I just was burnt out of school and felt I wasn't really learning anything, and I was wasting money. And I told my dad I really just want to get to work and start earning money. So it took about 90 days to make my first sale, but when I did, commission was $600, and that was in a $1.25 minimum wage market where friends of mine that were 18 that were pumping gas, were making $60 a week. And that transaction, it took me all of maybe 3 or 4 hours to do, and I'm thinking, this looks pretty good. So from then on, I just, within 6 months, I was bringing in $3,000 to $5,000 a month in commissions, and probably spending that much, but life was great at 18. So that's how I started.
No, that's awesome. And were you doing, residential sales, or what kind of
I started in the
sales
land
were you doing?
My dad's stuff. I was selling land, which was a great incubator for a real estate salesman, because my dad owned the land and he also financed it. So we were able to just sidestep a lot of the traditional real estate. There was no lenders, no appraising. My dad had his own escrow department. It was, someone said they wanted to buy this piece of property on a Saturday, and I was at their house on Tuesday with all the closing docs, and it recorded that week, and it was done, and I was paid. So
wow.
It was a great business. Yeah. If you look, anybody who's read like hunting and fishing magazines over the years, and the back of them, you see, 40 acres in Colorado, which is probably up in the high desert somewhere, for $35,000, $5,000 down, $200 a month, we finance. That's what we did. And there's land guys all over the West that did that type of stuff. So
Very cool. No, it's always interesting to hear different ways that people get into it. How long did you do that as a real estate agent?
I sold land for about 10 years until I was about 28 or so. And then at that point, and probably the last 3 or 4 years, I moved into, I actually worked for other people taking listings. And my skill at finding land was pretty good, and was very good with maps. This is pre-GPS, obviously, so I could read a topo. I could look at a topo, get back in the National Forest, find that 360 acres, walk it with people, and sell it. And so, and in those days, we got 10 to 15% commissions on land sales, was customary. And so you would take a listing and you would take it for 1 to 2 years because it took a long time. But when I would sell something for, let's say, a big ranch for $250,000, I'd have a $20,000 or $30,000 commission. So, and then again, back when that was quite a bit of money. Okay. The other reason I like that is because the folks that I worked for, there was no bank involved. This was all owner financing. So I just had to find that person that would buy, and then I could have a payday. So I sold a lot of ranches in Northern California, some vineyard land, and some trophy ranches to, very wealthy people that are still my friends today. So get to use their ranches occasionally to fish and whatnot.
Nice. So there's a few different perks to selling land.
Yeah, and I'm more than certain you have land brokers out in your neck of the woods too that sell, probably big trophy ranches and, where there's elk running and all sorts of game and whatnot. It's a niche, and it's a fun one.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I have seen those advertisements for land up in the mountains in Colorado, 40 acres or whatever it is, and you seem like, wow, that doesn't seem like a bad deal. Of course, I don't think they're very close to anything. No. But it's what you use it for. I mean, that's what it's meant to be. Hunting
it's for people that like to go, ride their ATVs or shoot their guns or they're off the gridders. They have a dream of living there when the whole world implodes. That.
Right. Yeah. So then, after doing the land sales, you got into the mortgage business. Is that kind of how the time frame went?
Well, actually, I went from there to working with a big syndicator, what you would call guys that you see on bigger pockets that are putting apartment deals together that are syndicators. Right. I went to work for one of those, and I was there for about 4 or 5 years. And they were doing a lot of apartment buildings in Northern California. They were over $1 billion company, and they wanted to branch into land and subdividing. And I had done a lot of that, and I'd also helped my dad with. In California, you can finance subdivisions with municipal bonds, and so I had a background with that as well. And that's how I got hired on. There was a big project just outside and north of Sacramento that was 520 lots, and they hired me to put the financing package together, the marketing, and all of that. And then that spawned to working on that deal and also buying them about 20 other projects in the gold country of California. So as we went through that, I had a contact from my dad had used a local hard money lender in Oakland for 25 years to, do his land deals. And he was retiring and he had no heirs. And it was very tightly knit. It was him and my dad's attorney. Everybody knew each other. And I just came in and said, we'd like to, you've built this up for 35 years. It'd be a shame just to let it go. There was about 300 investors and a book of business of about 50 million. And so I went over there and mentored with him for about 1.5 years, and then he retired, and I ended up buying the company from him and was basically given the company and just paid him out as we made income. So I ran that for about 3 or 4 years as the owner of it and got a really good education in lending money. And this was all in the Bay Area. And we did primarily seconds back then. This was going to be from 87 to 92. And to developers that would get a good deal on a first, and then we would come in with like the second stack of debt and short-term stuff. And I rode through my first traumatic downturn while I was there in '89. The Bay Area had its own kind of meltdown. There was the earthquake, if you remember, during the World Series, and then the war started, and the market, it crashed in the Bay Area. The people have a lot of short memories, but even in San Francisco and Peninsula and everything, the hallowed ground of high-priced real estate, some of that stuff fell 40 to 50%. So I had loans on quite a bit of it, and I had to do a lot of workouts and took properties back. It was my first iteration of how to deal when things aren't going well. And we survived that. And in '92, I sold that to another mortgage company up in Sacramento and pivoted. And that's when I came to Oregon and, of all things, got in the timber business.
Yes, I think it's amazing the different track you've taken and how you've kind of gone from business to business. But it kind of, if you look at it as a whole, it kind of makes sense when you hear your story about how you went from agent, then kind of morphed into the syndication, which had to do with the land, then morphed into the lending, which had to do with your father. And I imagine the timber you had some experience with because you'd been selling land that was in forest country.
Yep. I had sold a lot of timberland over the days. I had always sold them to people like what I turned into was a timberland buyer. I had always just brokered them, and next thing I know, within a year, they're logging them or thinning them. I'd never been on that side of the equation. And remember, through this whole time, I've kept my real estate broker's license and always had some transactional real estate going along the whole time. I never, even when I was working with the other companies and whatnot, I would still, if I got a land referral to list a ranch up in Sonoma or Napa or wherever, I would take that listing and work it, even while I had these other jobs going. So I was kind of double dipping there. So yeah, coming up to Oregon, I ran into a guy who my dad referred me to, who it was a perfect marriage. He knew nothing about real estate, and I really didn't know anything about timber specifically. I thought they were all pine trees. I didn't know there was pine and fir and cedar and all sorts of different variety of trees, and I had no clue as to how much money they were worth. And it was somewhat of a leap of faith. I was living in the Napa Valley, and I was commuting to Portland to do this work. He handled all the logging activities, and I handled putting all the money together and the banking contacts and all the real estate aspect of it. So a lot of what we would buy, the scenario would go, we would find a 40-acre tract that had timber on it. It was zoned, we could break it into 410s. So getting a harvest permit in Oregon, you can punch your logging roads in with just a permit over the counter. It's not like building a subdivision where you have to go through, all the engineering of the roads and everything. So it would just happen that our logging road would be right up the center, and our landings, which is where you bring all the logs to, would be like a big home site. Just happened to be right where we might have a future home. So when we were done logging it, our road was already put in under logging standards. And then when I came back in and did a 4-way split on it and ended up with 4 home sites, my road was already in and all my home sites were already identified, where we had cleared them out and flattened them using logging equipment, which required no permits. So once they're existing, it was quite simple. So in the really good days, the timber would just about pay for the land. Sometimes we'd even have a profit just on the timber, and the land was free and or we made cash out of it. And then we sold the lots off to homeowners, and that was how we derived our profit. And it was a spectacular business for about a 8 or 9 year run there through the 90s. That also led me into buying some subdivision ground in Portland and creating lots for home builders as well.
Wow. So how long would it take from the time you bought the land, harvested the timber, subdivided it, and then sold it off? How long was that process on the land?
The logging went very quickly. This was the great part of the business. And then on top of that, I pre-sold the logs. So I had 2 things. I had a bank line of credit to pay for the land, and or I could get a advance from a mill on a timber deed that would pay for the whole thing zero interest, no points, no cash out of pocket. I mean, that's how good it was in certain deals. So I was either tagging my lines of credit with the bank, or that would cost me money because I'd have to pay interest. Or I would get a mill that would come in, they would scale up all the timber, and they would cut a check for it and take a timber deed, which was good for a year, and then you had to deliver the logs. And as you delivered the logs, they ticked off what you owed them. And at the end of the day, you usually made a profit, plus you ended up with the land free and clear. And this is how the timber industry has gone for 150 years.
I had no idea. So I always learn something new, but
most people don't. And I don't want to just say these deals are like, just sitting out there to be plucked. When I got into the business up here, I analyzed it. It was old school. It was the old mills, and they would just have an ad in the paper with a log buyer, right? So no one was going after these people. Well, I used my training I learned as a real estate broker to go after the people and solicit them. So what I did, and again, this is all pre-internet basically and pre-Google and all that stuff, I had a guy, but laptops had come out. I didn't know how to run one, but I hired a kid that did. And in Oregon, you have very good aerial photographs right at the counter at the planning departments. I had him going into the counties that I worked, identifying, going through the plat maps one at a time, looking at an aerial. If it had 10 acres or more of harvestable timber, that you could see on the aerial, and it wasn't owned by a timber company or some corporation, that became a lead, and then we would just go into the records, figure out who it is. And then we were able to do the reverse directory to get, the phone numbers. So I put that database together. I had about 10,000 properties between the Oregon border and just south of Seattle. That was our target. And then I'd have telemarketers come in twice a week, just like top agents have people calling on listings, for listing appointments.
Mm-hmm.
We would just call for an appointment to give them a free evaluation of their timber.
Wow.
And that's how we created the leads. And believe me, no one had ever called these people. They had never been telemarketed. So it was virgin territory.
Kind of like the modern day driving for dollars, where you're driving around looking for vacant houses.
Well, that's how loggers used to buy timber. My partner, when I met him, that's what he was doing. I said, "How do you get these deals?" "Oh, I just drive up the driveways and knock on the doors." I go, "Well, that is totally inefficient. Why don't we do this?" And it was great. I mean, we did quite well.
Nice. And you said that helped you move into subdivisions and housing developments. How did that happen?
Well, because of my background with my dad, I had done a lot of the stuff that the land that he had done was also residential lots, smaller lots, and for houses. And so I had put those deals together, and I had put the financing, the bond issues together in the early 80s. So up here in Oregon, you can't do that. You can't use public bonds to build private infrastructure. So in the Portland market in those days, the builders were not vertically integrated. You had two distinct developers. You had the group of guys that bought land and created lots and then sold them to builders. And then you had builders who just bought lots from land developers. So there was, again, a niche in time where I was able to be a land developer, because at the time I wasn't a home builder. And it was just a natural progression of what we did out in the forest to come into the city and buy a 5-acre tract and whack it into 15 lots. And I did that. I did about 7 or 8 subdivisions, probably totaling maybe 300 lots or so. And then what happened was, as we had the first real big run up towards the end of the 90s, the builders, because land was getting so scarce, they just stepped right in. They started buying the lots, the land themselves, and developing them themselves. So the lot developer pretty much went away by about 2000 in Portland. And they're very rare to find somebody who only does lots now. I mean, I don't know anybody that does that. Everybody in the business now is, the land is so hard to get and so scarce because of our urban growth boundary that, the builders have to have their own development team in-house and buy the raw land, put the streets and roads in and then build. And they're vertically integrated.
No,
so
I see a lot of that here too, where, there's not lots for sale. It's almost all builders who come in, buy the land, do the development themselves, and then one primary builder will build most of the lots. Maybe he'll sell some lots to a few other builders, but yeah, it seems like the builder's doing more development than anyone else.
Right. So as I rolled out of that, as partnerships go, I had a great partnership with my guy in the timber business. We're still great friends, but it was time to move on. I was ready to, and the log market had died. Part of what made the log market so good when I did it was the Japanese log. And when the Japanese economy hit the skids, our $1,200 log went down to $600 or $700. So the profit margins weren't in it like there used to be. So there really wasn't room for two executive salaries in that little company. And since this was his ground and, he knew all the logging, I wasn't going to be a logger. It was best for me to leave him, his, and it was his company that he invited me into. So it wouldn't have been right for me to take it. So I stepped out and I got back into, kind of my real estate roots in California, and I started chasing courthouse step foreclosures, and I did that exclusively for a couple of years, extremely competitive in our market. Sat down with my accountant one day, and he said, you really should be lending the money. And I said, well, instead of doing all this work and chasing all these deals, I said, well, I have experience doing that. I ran a $50 million book of business there for 5 years. I really don't want to go back into corralling 300 different investors, though, like I did. In California, to make a loan, you can fractionalize a deed of trust. And that means you can basically do a tenant in common on the deed of trust. So it was always, if I had a $200,000 loan, Mark put in 20 grand, Jay put in 50. So there's a lot of back end accounting that had to be done to run it that way. And I told my accountant, I said, if I can go to my bank that I now have a 12-year track record with, and if I can talk them into giving me a facility for hard money loans, I would do that. That way I don't have to deal with investors. And we were blessed. We had some capital, and in the day, figuring circa 2002, I could leverage that 4-to-1. So with $1 million of capital, I could get a $4 million line of credit, which is what I did. And from 2002 to 2006, I ran that right back up to about $35 million. And I also got introduced to turnkey investing at that time. It was I was specializing in loans to California folks that were buying turnkey investments in the Midwest, starting in Detroit, ending in Jackson, Mississippi, and every city in between that. So I had an extensive book of business. I was, again, because of my real estate background and my marketing background, I loved the way these guys were set up. They had, marketing companies in LA, they had radio shows, they had all the, the high credit borrowers out of the West Coast who were priced out. You see this going on online now and on bigger pockets. I'm priced out of the West Coast, so I'm going to go out to the Midwest and buy a rental property because they're cheap. So what we did is we did the original BRRRR, they call, that buy, fix it up, refi it, and repeat. So instead of people paying cash for it, I was a hard money lender putting the retail client into title, and then the turnkey operator would do all the rehab, put the tenant in, and once they got a 442, our loan was already set up. The lender was in LA who was doing all these loans, through Countrywide or Wells Fargo or whoever. So we rolled out of these at an average of like 91 days was our average. So someone would they would pick a property in, Indianapolis or Memphis or Detroit or wherever, and I'd put them into title, and in 90 days their refi would come through. I'd be paid off, and we would just do it again. And so between 2002 and 2008, the last 2 years I was in it, I had run that up pretty aggressively, and I was doing anywhere from 40 to 60 loans a month, and I was in 12 markets, and life was good. Well, we all know what happened, in October of '08. Investor mortgages stopped happening, and I was stuck with about 450 California folks with hard money loans with me, and they had no way to exit, and I had to work through all those. I worked through about half of them. I got paid off in some manner. The other half I ended up owning, and I had to work through those as REOs. And I actually moved out to the Midwest and spent a year corralling all that stuff, and have since sold it off. And I actually, in about 10 days now, I'm going to pay off my last line of credit. That pays all that stuff off. And so I got through that time with personally losing a lot of equity, because you just can't, we were making loans. I look at this one property in Atlanta in particular. It was worth $150. It was a nice 2,000 square foot, 6-year-old home, renting for $1,000 a month, and appraised for $150 all day long. We put a loan on it for $90. They couldn't get a refinance. By the time 2009 came around and I ended up owning it, and the LA people went dark on me, I ended up selling that house for $35,000 just to get out of it.
Jeez.
Lost $55,000 on it. And the problem I had is I had pressure from my lenders, and I had two partners that were up in age, and they were like, we just want to exit, and I'm like, we need to keep this stuff and rent it out. No, we need to balance the portfolio. So it was a conscious decision to. Part of it was we didn't have a decision. The banks were calling our lines of credit because they were all on 1-year revolvers. So anyway, I triaged that and lost a substantial amount of my own personal net worth. But I got through it with credit intact. Every lender got paid off. Nobody took a short. Everybody got all their interest. And, we lived to fight another day. So as I saw that happening, though, I saw the value proposition in these homes out there. And in 2011, I started buying them. And I ran that up. I bought about 350 of them. And I sold out of that in 2013. I bought a bunch in Atlanta with different partners. Bought a bunch in Atlanta and ended up flipping those to a hedge fund. We did very well. I was not going to get caught like I got caught the last time. If I got a deal that came in and I was going to double my money, I'm not going to hold them. I'm going to just take the money off the table and get cash up again. So that's how that all played out. And then in the last 3.5, 4 years, I've just been basically doing joint venture funding for folks here in Portland and in a few markets around the country. And then I do my own building now. Instead of selling the lots off, I started about 3.5 years ago. I figured, well, if I'm going to take the risk lending money to builders, I might as well build them myself and get all the money instead of just the lending fee. Because at the end of the day, if the builder goes bust, I end up owning it anyway. So I might as well take that. I'm taking the risk anyway. We had a very unique situation happening in the United States where a lot of the builders that had all this experience went busto from 2008 to 2011, and these guys were having a hell of a time trying to get restarted again. They had no credit. They couldn't get loans. They had to, they filed Chapter 7. They didn't have the capital. So it allowed me, especially in the Portland market here, I've got two builders that now build as a fee for me that I would have never got prior to '08. These are guys that have built 500 homes and were quite wealthy at one time. But they need to restart. I saved my credit and my core bank here in Portland. I still have substantial lines of credit with. So I'm able to go out and actually go toe-to-toe with, like D.R. Horton or Lennar or somebody like that. And then I stumbled on Charleston, South Carolina, and I've done about 20 homes there in the last 18 months, and that's also a very vigorous market. And then I have all my other just fix and flip stuff in certain markets. So that's what I'm doing currently, and loving life so far.
That's incredible, all the different avenues you've taken and things you've done. I'm curious on the building because, I'm in Colorado, and we have an incredibly hot market right now. It's just, one of the highest appreciating in the country. And what I saw was for, almost 10 years, there was no building here because our market was down. There was a supply of foreclosures, and people didn't have to build, and I couldn't make any money building because prices were so low. And I think that created this huge shortage of houses because people kept moving here, but there's nothing being built. Have you seen that in other markets as well, where it seems like there's just a shortage of homes?
Absolutely. I just actually posted on BP, there's a thread going about, are we in another bubble again? And a lot of people were talking about macroeconomics and all this other stuff. And my post was really as simple as the new home construction stopped in '08, and in a lot of markets it still hasn't started, or it's just started back up in the last year or two. You still have in-migration of people moving in that need homes, and many of these markets, Portland, Denver, Charleston, probably Austin, there's just an acute shortage of new construction. And the banks, just like with my bank here, they let me go, but I can only have 12 spec homes at any one time. And I got to thinking, in the old days I could do this with zero cash out of pocket. Now, when I look at my deals, I might have a $225,000 loan on a $375 house. So even if you had a retreat in values, the bank is safe. So they're requiring me to bring in a lot of equity compared to what they used to. This is also, so between equity requirements and the banks only loaning to people they really know and trust, they've constricted the supply. And if you have to go hard money, you know how expensive that is, and it can take the profit out of a deal pretty quickly. So I agree with you. It's, the building's coming back, but it's not at the pace to keep up with demand.
Right.
The markets have gotten hot. Yep.
And I've seen that here, and I'm still, I've talked about this before. I'm thinking about selling some of my rentals because our market is so hot. But yeah, I don't see a huge, another housing crisis coming. I don't see that happening. I mean, I might see it leveling off some, but it seems like a completely different environment than where we were at, 5 to 10 years ago with the crazy lending going on.
Yeah, you had a lot of things going on there. I look at prior to '08, I was a pretty heavy-duty foreclosure buyer as I was running up my hard money company. And, I saw a lot of HUDs. And so many of the deals were no money down, 80/20s. I look at the stuff we're selling now, depending on the subdivision, but, we'll get an FHA loan, then we'll get two conventionals. We'll actually have a cash sale. You never had that 10 years ago. Never. Because people were taught, don't pay cash for that house. Leverage it to the hilt, And so you have in my mind, this new run-up going, your borrowers are 10 times stronger, especially out in the quote-unquote cash flow rental markets. Tremendous amount of those houses have been bought with cash. A lot of foreigners paying cash for them. So you may have values stop rising in some markets and maybe retreat a little, but you're not going to have, the strategic default and hey, I'm giving up on this. I have no equity. I'm giving it back to the bank. So, I mean, that's my personal opinion. Not that you can't have regionalized issues with values and banking and whatnot, but I don't see, unlike you, I don't see the same scenarios that led to the '08 debacle.
Right. I'm curious, having been in California so long, and prices in the Bay Area especially are just crazy right now. What's your opinion? I mean, do you think the Bay Area can support those kind of prices, or do you see a fallback in that area coming anytime soon?
Well, if history repeats itself, it can definitely fall back. I lived it. By 1989, houses, in San Francisco, prime I had a loan on it. I can think of a house on Green Street I had a loan on, had an MAI appraisal at $2 million. The guy had a 900,000 B of A first, and I made a 200 second. And, with my investors, that's when and that thing went to foreclosure, and the first wiped us out. And, so it had dropped 50% in value, after the earthquake and stuff. So it can happen. I mean, it can. Whether it will or not, I don't know. The Bay Area economy is that much more stronger than it was in 89 to 92. Apple, Google, all those people weren't the huge home run. You didn't have, all those companies were kind of in their infancy, and now they're mature, so you have that much more purchasing power there. And you have a whole bunch of Asian money coming into that area. A lot of those people pay cash for stuff, so they can write it out. I could see even in the '08 thing, like I grew up in Cupertino and lived in Palo Alto, prices, the Cupertino house got to $1.2 million, and, in the down in '09, maybe it got down to $1 million, or, you had a little bit of retrenching, but it came right back up. I suspect if you had a massive earthquake again, kind of like what we had in '87, where you had disruption of services and all that, that could cause some issues. But if you look at it globally, and you look at some of the very expensive markets in other parts of the world, they're on a par. You can't go into the prime areas of London and buy anything under $2 to $5 million.
Right. Australia's the same way, especially Sydney.
Sydney, Brisbane. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
I was just over in Singapore, and although a lot of that's government owned over there, but the privately owned real estate there is, a private home over there is $5 to $20 million.
That's crazy. Well, I guess we have a shortage of land and a lot of people. That's what's going to happen.
So you have that right now. In the Bay Area, you have it because, you have the bay in the middle, and they're not allowing you to fill it in anymore like they used to, like Foster City's all built on fill. And then you go up into the hills, and you can't put density in the mountains, so there's a shortage of land. In Oregon, we have what's called an urban growth boundary, which ties up land for anywhere from 25 to 50 years. So we just have a governmental shortage of land. In our area here, if you wanted to, you could bring in 20 million people, because you got flat land from Portland all the way to Eugene. But you'll never touch it. It's all ag land. It's never going to change. Ergo, we have a huge shortage of, buildable land that's been created by government. The reason, and then Charleston, where I'm at right now, is the same thing. That city's on a peninsula. It's surrounded by water. There just isn't any land, and it's a very popular place to be, and it's got a lot going on for itself. So, and like Denver, the Denver area is quality of life. You get the ski areas and the mountains, and a major airport to get places, and so people look at those things.
Yep, for sure. Wow. No, it's a lot of great information. I'm curious, changing course here a little bit, looking back at all the things you've done and all the businesses you've been in. I know it's probably a hard question to ask, but what do you think you had the most fun doing, or what was the most exciting for you out of everything?
Well, I will say the timber business was the most fun, hands down. It was really cool to walk out on a property and be able to convert one asset to cash so quickly and so easily. So on a business aspect, that was great. And you didn't deal with, in Oregon, because it is a timber-based economy, or had been all its life, you just don't have the red tape to be in the timber business like California, where it's next to impossible to log, or Washington, that's even that much harder. Oregon is over the counter, and you get a cutting permit in 3 days, and it's quite easy. And so I had as much fun doing that as probably anything that I've ever done. I'm having a lot of fun now with my guys across the country that I'm helping supply capital for to do their fix and flips. Just, a lot of them I've helped them, quit their day jobs or, get to the next level. So that's also fun. And, so we'll just keep doing that as long as the markets hold out and, give us the opportunities to do that.
Right. Yeah. And I think, I've fixed and flipped with my father since 2001. So we went through the whole housing crisis. I don't think Colorado got hit as bad as some other areas. We definitely had a downturn, but it wasn't immediate. It took a few years for prices to go down. And I think, if you're investing in flips the right way with the current market in mind and not hoping that prices will increase, I think you can keep flipping through most any market. But I think, people get in trouble when they start thinking, I've got to pay more money to get this house, and, it should be worth more in 6 months because our market keeps going up. I think that's where people get in trouble.
That is totally, I agree with that 100%. The big syndicator I worked with in the mid-'80s, as smart as they were and as big a company as they had, they started to have that mindset. Oh, we can buy that, that land in Sacramento because in 2 years we're going to develop these lots, and even though we're going to be on them 80, in 2 years they'll be worth 110. Go ahead and buy them. Well, that didn't happen, because in the late 80s we had the recession in California and it went the other way. And they found themselves in some trouble.
Right. Yep. All right. Well, great interview so far. I have one more question. I think we covered, a ton of stuff. We talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but, there's a lot of people out there who want to get started investing in real estate. They see how, awesome it can be for some of us who've been doing it for a while, but they don't have any money. They don't have credit. They just want to, somehow jump into the game and start making money. What's your advice for is investing the right route to go into, or should they be doing something else first?
Well, that's a great question. And I'm going to start that off with, one, it's regionalized. In certain areas, it's absolutely a non-starter. And that would be obviously the better markets we're talking about. You're totally wasting your time. You can go into other markets where you see houses, like a Michigan or Ohio or some of the Rust Belt areas where houses are trading at $5,000 and $10,000. So somebody with no money could probably, wiggle their way in and get something in contract and flip it and make a couple $1,000s. But even at that, you have to have the money to be able to market to them and then be able to somehow, and have enough experience about how transactions work to actually make the deal go. I get approached by a ton of wholesalers, because I'm buying for cash all this property all over the country. And boy, a lot of these people that I either talk to or write to me are just, they don't have the experience really to pull it off. And you can tell talking to them. So, and I only really know one way to do it, and that's the way I did it. I started as a real estate agent so that I learned the vocabulary, I learned how transactions worked. I was around other real estate agents that were successful, that were making money. And actually in my line, because it was a land business, I was around some guys that were professional salespeople. And in your real estate business that not everybody is successful at real estate. Some people don't have the sales skills to close on a deal. You still have to ask for the order. You got to know how to do it. So that would be two things. One is kind of get in the game where you can get in with a real estate company or get on a big team and have the people teach you how to do it, and then take some sales training classes so that once you do get a lead, you know how to handle it and you don't just fumble through it. So that would be my advice. You need to, most of the people that I see that are successful investors, and of course I've dealt with them my whole career, they've usually made money in their day job and they've saved it. And now they have some money to invest in real estate. That's what I call an investor. Someone with no money and no credit is not really an investor. They're trying to act basically as a transactional agent, making money by doing a transaction. So I see that as two completely different things.
Right. No, I would agree with you. It's more of a job. It's not investing.
Right. And even, so how are you going to buy a rental house? You can talk some people in really low value areas where they just want to dump the property. You can talk those people into, giving you seller carrybacks and stuff like that. But even at that, you're making the delta between rent and what all your payments are. It's still $100 or $200 a month. You need to have scale. You need to have a way to get to 50 or 100 homes if you're going to be dealing in that asset class. Otherwise, it's just you're never going to get to anything that's more than a job, and not that well paying a job at that. So
right.
That's my opinion on it.
No, that's great. And yeah, people email me and ask me questions and say, how do I get started with no money? I have bad credit. What do I do? How do I buy houses? And my first question is, why don't you have any money? I mean, I'm honestly asking them, try and fix something else before you jump into something new that you have no idea about. And the more money you can save, the better off you're going to be no matter what you do in life. So, yeah, I think sometimes priorities get mixed up about what's going to help you in the long run.
Well, a lot of this is promulgated through, late night TV, the gurus out there. And frankly, I know most of those guys personally because I've funded a lot of their back-end deals. And then I'm new to Bigger Pockets, but that is very much moved forward on Bigger Pockets with people, oh, you can do it. Oh, yeah, go ahead. You can do it. No problem. I did it. So people get the peanut gallery telling them that, oh, yeah, no problem. Keep at it. Keep your chin up. Do all this. But, it just isn't it's nice. It's nice to say that and nice to be positive, but it's not actually reality in most instances, especially if you live in a market where, the real estate is, your median price is, $280,000 and you're competing against professional buyers and buyers that have cash and whatnot,
Right.
So.
Yep, I would totally agree with you. Well, Jay, been awesome having you on the show. You did an great job. I learned a ton myself. If people want to get a hold of you, is Bigger Pockets the best place to find you?
Yeah, they can just find me on Bigger Pockets, and I have my email at the bottom of, I think, my bio or, whatever page you can go on there, and I'm happy to, answer, short questions. I do get a lot of people that are very nice that ask, they're looking for a mentor, and I'm not a mentor. I don't have the time to, sit down with folks and help them through their life struggles and trying to get into real estate. My way of giving back is doing these podcasts and just talking about what I would do on Bigger Pockets and my opinion on things, which again, with a grain of salt, it is just my opinion. So it's
right.
Not necessarily the right way to do it. It's just what I've done.
Nope, and you're very active on there. I know you've always chimed in when I've had questions or talked about different subjects, so I've always appreciated that. And yeah, I do, I think you give solid advice. It's not always kind of, telling people what they want to hear, which a lot of people do. So I've always appreciated that.
Well, it's my pleasure. And, I've the one thing I learned in high school to do was to type. so for me, I'm not a hunt and pecker. I mean, I'm a 40 to 50 word a minute typer, so I can get on there and type a couple paragraphs, and it doesn't take me very long to do it. And I'm happy to do it. So
great. All right. Well, Jake, thank you so much for being on. Anything else you want to add?
No, that's it. I'll next time I'm out in Denver, I'll give you a call. Maybe we can meet up in person, and you can take me for a ride in your Lamborghini.
Hey, that's a deal. I'd love to.
Yeah.
As long as there's no snow.
And if you get out to Portland, I'll take you up in my plane and give you the royal treatment, the fly around the Northwest, which is quite pretty as well. So.
Oh, awesome! I would take you up on that. So.
All right.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And yeah, have a great rest of the week.
Okay, you do the same. Bye.